What happens when animators stop treating cartoons like childhood entertainment and use them for violence, fear, politics, obsession, and deeply adult comedy? Part 2 enters an even stranger vault, where musical families collapse, laboratory dogs flee for their lives, supermarket food discovers the truth, and cheerful clay figures meet terrifying ideas. Before the countdown begins, like this video, and share it with anyone who still believes every animated movie is safe for children. Subscribe to the channel. Number 18. American Pop. 1981. One immigrant family carries the dream of American music across 4 generations. But every new beginning arrives with another painful cost. The story starts with young Zalmy, who escapes violence in Imperial Russia and reaches New York, where vaudeville offers him a possible future. His descendants move through jazz clubs, wartime stages, folk scenes, and rock concerts, always believing the next song might finally deliver the success their family deserves. Instead, ambition keeps colliding with war, prejudice, addiction, exploitation, and terrible timing. A memorable early sequence places Zalmy backstage among performers whose painted smiles hide exhausting lives. Music fills the theater, audiences applaud, and the boy sees show business as magic. Yet the film quickly reveals the machinery behind that magic. Performers are replaceable, managers are ruthless, and talent does not protect anyone from history. Later generations repeat the same mistake in different costumes, chasing fame while failing to understand what earlier relatives sacrificed. The most powerful moment arrives when Pete finally stands before a massive concert audience. On the surface, his performance looks like victory. The lights are huge, the crowd is roaring, and the family's long journey appears complete. But the scene carries the ghosts of everyone who never reached that stage. Success feels less like freedom than an inheritance made from unfinished lives. Ralph Bakshi used rotoscoping, popular recordings, and shifting visual styles to turn animation into a bruised national scrapbook. The adult quality comes from its honesty rather than simple shock. This is not a cheerful celebration of music history. It is a story about America promising reinvention while quietly demanding that each generation pay again. Number 17. Hey Good Lookin'. 1982. Brooklyn nostalgia turns sour when teenage gang leader Vinny tries to protect his reputation without admitting how frightened and unprepared he really is. He belongs to the Stompers, a group of young men who perform toughness on street corners while dreaming about romance, loyalty, and respect. His unstable friend Crazy Shapiro creates danger wherever he goes, while Rozzy wants Vinny to become more honest about their relationship. Rival gangs, angry relatives, and wounded pride push everyone toward an ending that feels inevitable. One famous passage follows Crazy as fear bends the city around him. Buildings seem hostile, ordinary faces become threatening, and the animation slips away from realism into a frantic personal nightmare. At first, the sequence feels funny because his panic is exaggerated. Then the humor weakens as viewers realize that Crazy cannot control what he sees. His wild behavior is not just rebellion. It is a warning that nobody around him knows how to help. The movie began production years before its eventual release, and that troubled journey can be felt in the finished work. Its 1950s setting is filled with colorful cars, dance music, leather jackets, and romantic memories, but the past never becomes comfortable. Characters use stereotypes, insults, and violence as armor. They believe adulthood means dominating someone before someone dominates them. Vinny's central conflict is not simply whether he can defeat another gang. He must decide whether he values the people around him more than the image he has created. That choice arrives too late for several characters. Ralph Bakshi presents street life with affection, anger, and embarrassment, as though he is arguing with his own memories. The cartoon promises a lively trip into old Brooklyn, then reveals boys trapped by the roles they learn to perform. If these first 2 forgotten films surprised you, press like and share the countdown with another animation fan. Subscribe now, because the next entries move from troubled neighborhoods into monsters, war, laboratories, and nightmares that family cartoons would never dare to show. Number 16. Heavy Metal. 1981. A glowing green sphere called the Lochnar travels across time and space, poisoning nearly everyone who touches it. Rather than following one hero, the movie presents several science fiction and fantasy stories connected by this object. A futuristic taxi driver becomes involved with criminals. A nervous teenager is transported into a warrior's body. A bomber crew faces something impossible in the sky, and reckless space travelers stumble through danger with very little dignity. Each chapter changes style, tone, and setting, making the film resemble an adult illustrated magazine turning its own pages. The most famous section belongs to Tarna, the final warrior of an ancient order. After the Lochnar corrupts invaders and a peaceful city is destroyed, she receives a silent call for justice. Her preparation scene is remembered because it slows the movie down. She dresses for battle, mounts a giant winged creature, and crosses a ruined landscape while the soundtrack gives her journey the weight of myth. Nothing about the moment is playful. The animation treats her as the last answer to a world that has already failed. Another unforgettable sequence occurs aboard a wartime bomber. Exhausted crew members confront reanimated bodies in the aircraft, and the tight metal corridors turn into a flying trap. It combines pulp adventure with horror, in a way mainstream Western animation rarely attempted at the time. Rock music, graphic fantasy violence, suggestive imagery, and wildly different visual approaches made the film impossible to confuse with children's entertainment. Yet its lasting appeal comes from more than rebellion. Every story asks what people become when power removes consequences. Some turn heroic, others greedy, and many become ridiculous. The movie is uneven by design, but that unpredictability became its identity. It behaves like something discovered after midnight, passed between viewers who cannot believe a major studio allowed it to exist. Number 15. The Plague Dogs, 1982. Freedom becomes another form of terror when Rolf and Snitter escape from a British research laboratory. Rolf has been repeatedly forced into water experiments, leaving him convinced that humans will always hurt him. Snitter has undergone brain surgery and experiences confusion, memories, and hallucinations that he cannot separate. After slipping beyond the laboratory fence, the dogs enter the countryside expecting relief. Instead, they discover freezing weather, hunger, frightened livestock, armed pursuers, and rumors that they may carry a dangerous disease. A fox known as the Todd teaches them how to survive by hunting, but every meal creates more enemies. Rolf believes toughness will keep them alive, while Snitter continues hoping that a kind owner might appear. Their friendship becomes heartbreaking because each dog protects a different illusion. Rolf pretends hope is useless, and Snitter pretends the world still contains a safe home waiting for him. One of the most disturbing scenes happens during a confrontation involving a rifle. The moment is sudden, confusing, and presented from the animal's limited understanding. There is no heroic music or reassuring explanation. A human life ends, panic spreads, and the dogs become even more feared, despite not understanding what occurred. The final shoreline sequence is unforgettable. With hunters closing in, Snitter believes he sees an island beyond the mist. He enters the water, and Rolf follows because loyalty matters more than certainty. The distant shape may be land, imagination, or a final comforting lie. The film refuses to confirm an easy rescue. That refusal separates it from ordinary animated animal adventures. Gentle drawings and sympathetic voices make the suffering harder, not softer. The story asks viewers to identify completely with creatures that institutions call expendable. By the ending, the dogs are not searching for freedom anymore. They are searching for one place where human fear cannot reach them. Number 14. The Adventures of Mark Twain, 1985. A clay version of Mark Twain prepares to meet Halley's Comet while traveling in a strange flying vessel. Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, and Becky Thatcher secretly join him, expecting adventure. Instead, Twain guides them through stories and ideas involving creation, vanity, heaven, judgment, and death. The handmade characters and storybook settings appear inviting, yet the film repeatedly enters philosophical territory far darker than its family-friendly appearance suggests. The sequence that shocked generations introduces the mysterious stranger. The children meet a calm, masked figure who claims to have no name and creates tiny clay people for amusement. He gives them homes, personalities, and a small civilization. For a moment, the miniature world looks charming. Then the people begin arguing, and the stranger destroys them with complete emotional detachment. He explains humanity as temporary and insignificant, while the children watch helplessly. What makes the scene frightening is its quietness. The stranger does not behave like a loud villain. He speaks gently, almost politely, as though erasing lives is simply part of a demonstration. His mask remains expressionless while the clay figures panic. The contrast between soft stop-motion craft and cold ideas creates a feeling ordinary horror rarely achieves. Elsewhere, Twain appears tired by humanity's cruelty, but still fascinated by imagination. The children slowly understand that his journey toward the comet may also be a journey toward death. Their adventure, therefore, becomes an attempt to decide whether stories can offer meaning when life remains brief and unfair. Remarkably, the production was promoted to broad audiences and often encountered by children. Its difficult ideas were hidden inside familiar literary characters and beautiful clay animation. That disguise explains why the film remains so memorable. It does not simply adapt Mark Twain. It places childhood curiosity beside cosmic indifference and allows both to speak, without guaranteeing that hope will win. Number 13. Fire and Ice, 1983. A moving glacier crushes kingdoms as the sorcerer Necron uses ice to expand his empire. Villages disappear beneath frozen walls, survivors scatter, and the people of Fire Keep prepare for an approaching war. Larn escapes the destruction of his home and becomes involved with Princess Tigra, whose kidnapping is part of Necron's strategy. Their journey eventually joins them with Darkwolf, a masked warrior who seems built from every heroic fantasy painting at once. The glacier itself provides the movie's most striking image. It is not merely scenery behind the characters. It advances like a living weapon, splitting forests, burying homes, and forcing entire populations to flee. People run beneath towering blue surfaces while the world they knew vanishes behind them. The sequence gives the threat an enormous scale before the central villain has even entered the story. Another famous passage follows Tigra during her escape from Necron's creatures. She moves through dangerous wilderness while predators and soldiers search for her. The rotoscoped animation gives her body weight and momentum, making the chase feel more physical than a standard fantasy cartoon. That realism also makes every fall, strike, and near capture feel harsher. Ralph Bakshi collaborated with fantasy artist Frank Frazetta, and the finished movie resembles Frazetta's painted covers brought into motion. Muscular warriors, volcanic landscapes, shadowed monsters, and dramatic poses dominate nearly every frame. Although the film did not receive an X rating, its revealing costumes, forceful combat, and threatening atmosphere clearly targeted older viewers. The plot remains simple. Fire must resist ice, and courage must confront tyranny. Yet the presentation makes it feel forbidden. It rejects cute companions, comic relief, and safe fantasy charm. The movie looks like an adult paperback illustration escaped from a bookstore rack, picked up a sword, and refused to soften itself for younger audiences. Number 12. The Big Bang, 1987. Civilization collapses because powerful people repeatedly choose pride over common sense. After a disastrous global conflict, men and women occupy rival territories and treat each other as enemy species. Into this divided world comes Fred, a small, unimpressive survivor who becomes essential to a plan involving reproduction, political control, and the possible continuation of humanity. The story moves like a rude editorial cartoon, using science fiction to attack nearly every institution it encounters. One defining sequence explains how the old world ended. A limited confrontation is misunderstood. Governments respond without patience, and each retaliation becomes larger than the one before it. Leaders speak confidently while making decisions based on fear and wounded ego. Within moments, civilization is reduced to ruins. The destruction is presented as a joke, but the speed of the escalation gives the comedy an uncomfortable edge. Nobody truly wants the final disaster, yet nobody is willing to appear weak enough to stop it. Later scenes exaggerate the conflict between the surviving sexes until both societies look ridiculous. Each side creates myths about the other, and those myths become more useful than reality because they justify control. Fred is treated as a possible solution, a symbol, and a biological resource rather than a complete person. Belgian cartoonist Picha fills the movie with crude drawings, deliberate bad taste, political mockery, and jokes that challenge respectable boundaries. Religion, militarism, nationalism, gender roles, and scientific authority are all placed under the same harsh light. The animation looks loose and simple, allowing ideas to transform instantly into visual jokes. That freedom makes the film difficult to imagine within a modern studio system. It refuses to protect any group from ridicule, and rarely pauses to become polite. Beneath the chaos is a bleak argument. Humanity may survive enormous catastrophes, but it will rebuild the same foolish divisions unless people stop treating domination as proof of intelligence. Number 11. Marquise, 1989. Inside a prison before the French Revolution, an aristocratic dog resembling the Marquis de Sade writes stories while guards, prisoners, clergy members, and officials struggle for control. Every performer wears an elaborate animal mask, making the world resemble a diseased fable about power. Live action, puppetry, and clay animation combine until viewers can no longer decide whether they are watching history, theater, or a private nightmare. The strangest recurring conversation occurs between the imprisoned writer and an intimate part of his own body, which behaves as a separate character. Without describing the imagery directly, the idea remains outrageous. The two argue about desire, creativity, jealousy, and control. The Marquis believes thought should command appetite, while his rebellious companion insists that appetite often creates the thoughts. Their exchanges turn private impulse into a philosophical debate that no conventional costume drama would attempt. A memorable clay-animated section begins when one of the Marquis' stories escapes the limitations of the cell. Shapes grow, bodies change, and fantasy becomes more expressive than the physical prison. These moments reveal why authorities fear his imagination. Walls can contain the writer, but they cannot control the worlds he constructs. Roland Topor, whose visual imagination also influenced Fantastic Planet, helped create the film's grotesque style. The animal faces are not cute disguises. They expose social roles. Officials behave like predators, religious figures protect appearances, and prisoners reproduce the same hierarchies used against them. The coming revolution remains outside the walls, but its pressure is felt everywhere. Almost every character claims to defend morality while privately pursuing power or pleasure. That hypocrisy becomes the true target. Marquis should not exist as a normal historical production because it refuses normal categories. It is an obscene puppet play, a political argument, a prison fantasy, and a dark comedy about the dangerous distance between what society condemns publicly and what it secretly desires. Number 10. Felidae, 1994. A curious house cat named Francis moves into an old neighborhood and immediately finds a murdered cat. More bodies soon appear, each discovered under circumstances that suggest a deliberate pattern. Bluebeard, a rough local cat, introduces Francis to the territory, but the newcomer refuses to accept simple explanations. His investigation leads through abandoned buildings, secret meetings, scientific records, and a history that the neighborhood has buried beneath ordinary domestic life. The film's most notorious passages are Francis's nightmares. Religious symbols appear beside twisted bodies, impossible creatures, and images of death that would never be expected in a talking animal mystery. One dream presents a ceremony led by a terrifying figure, with rows of cats participating, as though violence has become worship. The sequence is not included merely to shock. Francis's sleeping mind connects clues that his waking mind has not yet organized. Another disturbing discovery involves an abandoned laboratory where cats were used in experiments. Documents and surviving memories reveal how cruelty created both physical suffering and a dangerous ideology. Francis eventually confronts Claudandus, an intelligent figure whose pain has convinced him that selective breeding and control can create a stronger species. That final conflict gives the mystery a moral center. Claudandus does not think of himself as a villain. He believes suffering has given him the right to design the future. Francis understands that intelligence without compassion becomes another laboratory cage. Detailed traditional animation makes the animals move convincingly, while their conversations address death, fanaticism, inherited trauma, and scientific responsibility. The familiar image of a clever pet detective pulls viewers into material closer to an adult crime thriller than a family adventure. Anyone choosing the film because of its cat-filled cover could be completely unprepared. Felidae proves that animation can hide a murder investigation inside a household world and make the ordinary sound of cats on rooftops feel threatening. Number 9. Perfect Blue, 1997. Fame becomes a psychological prison when pop singer Mima Kirigoe leaves her successful group to become an actress. Her decision disappoints devoted fans who believe they helped create her public identity. A threatening follower watches from crowded rooms, while a website called Mima's Room describes her daily activities with impossible accuracy. As her new television role becomes darker, she begins losing confidence in the difference between performance, memory, and reality. One of the film's most famous techniques occurs during a series of apparent awakenings. Mima experiences a frightening event, opens her eyes in bed, and believes it was a dream. Then another detail reveals that she may still be inside a performance or altered memory. The movie repeats this structure until viewers share her uncertainty. Scenes from the television drama resemble events in her life, and events in her life begin to resemble staged scenes. Mirrors become especially important. An idealized version of Mima appears in reflections wearing her former pop costume, smiling with the confidence she has lost. This image accuses her of betrayal and insists that the real Mima belongs to the audience. During the final chase, reflected identity and physical danger become inseparable. Satoshi Kon's directorial debut uses editing rather than supernatural explanation to create terror. A stage light can become a train light. A scripted attack can cut directly into an ordinary morning. The viewer is never allowed to settle comfortably into one reality. The story became even more relevant as online personas grew powerful. Strangers now watch performers continuously, debate their choices, and preserve older versions of them forever. Perfect Blue understood that fame allows an audience to imagine ownership over another person's face. Its adult material is disturbing, but the deeper horror is Mima's fear that the invented version of her may be more believable than the living woman trying to escape it. Number 8. South Park. Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, 1999. Four schoolboys sneak into a Canadian comedy that carries an adult rating, then return home, repeating everything they heard. Their parents react with outrage. But instead of examining their own responsibility, they create a moral campaign against the performers. The campaign grows into censorship, arrests, public punishment, and eventually war with Canada. What begins as children copying rude dialogue becomes an international crisis created almost entirely by adults claiming to protect them. The musical number Blame Canada remains the movie's most recognizable scene because it turns avoidance into a cheerful anthem. Parents stand together and sing about foreign influence while refusing to consider why their children were unsupervised. The tune sounds polished enough for a family musical. Yet every lyric reveals how quickly fear can become political theater. Another major sequence stages the planned execution of the Canadian comedians during a military celebration. Entertainment, punishment, and patriotism merge into one event. The adults are now prepared to commit real harm because fictional words offended them. Meanwhile, the children understand the consequences more clearly than the officials making decisions. The film copies the architecture of a grand animated musical. Characters sing emotional solos, lovers face separation, armies march, a villain waits below the earth, and the world approaches destruction. That traditional structure makes the satire sharper. The creators use the language of respectable family entertainment to attack panic surrounding unacceptable art. Crude comedy receives most of the attention, but the central question is serious. Who causes greater damage? Artists making offensive jokes? Children repeating those jokes? Or adults willing to destroy lives to prove moral authority? The answer is not flattering. By turning censorship into a war story, the movie argues that outrage can become more dangerous than the material it tries to erase. Its songs keep audiences laughing, while the plot quietly shows respectable society losing control. Number 7. Mutant Aliens, 2001. Astronaut Earl Jensen is deliberately abandoned during a space mission by the corrupt head of a government program. Officials tell the world that he died heroically, transforming their betrayal into patriotic publicity. Years later, Earl returns with bizarre hybrid creatures and plans to expose everyone responsible. His daughter Josie must face the difference between the father she imagined and the furious survivor who actually comes home. Bill Plimpton's colored pencil animation never remains still. Bodies wobble, stretch, divide, and reconnect according to emotion rather than anatomy. The mutant companions look as though separate species were forced together by an artist who refused to erase any mistake. That handmade movement gives every scene unpredictable energy. A heroic entrance can collapse into a visual joke, while a violent confrontation can suddenly transform into absurd slapstick. One memorable sequence reveals what happened after Earl vanished. Lost beyond Earth, he encounters creatures whose lives were also damaged by human interference. Their strange forms are funny at first, but they become evidence of exploitation. Earl gathers them into a replacement family and an army, convincing himself that revenge will repair stolen years. When he finally returns, the public story surrounding his disappearance proves stronger than the truth. Government leaders understand that controlling an image can matter more than controlling facts. Josie, meanwhile, realizes that exposing corruption will not automatically heal her father. The film parodies monster movies, heroic space programs, conspiracy thrillers, and masculine revenge fantasies. Its limited theatrical path fits a production made far outside conventional studio taste. It is angry, childish, inventive, and emotionally wounded at the same time. The mutants embody the movie's central idea. Damaged pieces can survive by joining together, but survival does not guarantee peace. Earl escaped space, yet he remains trapped inside the moment powerful men decided his life was disposable. Number 6. The Haunted World of El Superbiasto, 2009. A loud masked wrestler named El Superbiasto enjoys celebrity life in Monsterland while pretending to be a heroic defender of the public. His sister Susie X performs the dangerous work, fighting supernatural enemies with skill, weapons, and a giant robot. Their paths cross when Dr. Satan pursues a plan involving a mysterious woman, an ancient transformation, and enough monsters to overwhelm several ordinary horror movies. The film's most memorable feature is not one isolated scene, but its constant collision of styles. Zombie soldiers march beside nightclub performers. Mad science laboratories lead into musical numbers. Giant creatures interrupt conversations, and characters address the audience as though the movie knows it has already lost control. Bright television-like animation makes the adult jokes and violent action feel even more unexpected. A major battle demonstrates the central joke about heroism. Susie X understands the threat, creates a plan, and places herself in danger. Superbisto arrives with confidence, distracts everyone, and behaves as though applause matters more than success. He often receives attention because he looks like the traditional hero, even when his sister is saving the mission. Rob Zombie adapted the story from his comic series and filled the world with references to exploitation cinema, monster pictures, and drive-in entertainment. The result resembles a Saturday morning superhero program made by people who were forbidden from entering a television network's standards department. Beneath the noise is a recognizable satire of macho celebrity. Superbisto believes performance is achievement. Susie X knows achievement requires preparation. Their difference gives structure to a movie that otherwise races happily toward excess. The production earned an adult rating because it never pretended that colorful animation required family content. Every exaggerated pose, musical interruption, and ridiculous monster pushes against that assumption. It should collapse under the weight of its references, jokes, and chaos, but collapse is part of the experience. The film behaves like a forbidden cartoon channel discovered after midnight, broadcasting with nobody responsible left in the building. Number 5. Anomalisa, 2015. Everyone in Michael Stone's world has the same face and voice. He travels to Cincinnati to deliver a speech about customer service, but cannot connect emotionally with his wife, child, former lover, hotel employees, or devoted readers. Then he hears Lisa, a shy sales representative whose voice sounds completely unique. Michael immediately treats this difference as proof that she can rescue him from loneliness. A quiet hotel room sequence became the film's most discussed scene because the stop-motion puppets are presented with vulnerable realism rather than cartoon exaggeration. Their visible facial seams make each expression feel constructed, yet the awkward conversation feels painfully human. Michael encourages Lisa to sing, and her uncertain performance briefly creates the genuine connection he has been seeking. By breakfast, the fantasy begins collapsing. Small habits irritate him, and Lisa's special voice gradually sounds like everyone else. The change reveals that Michael does not truly see people. He idealizes them until ordinary humanity becomes inconvenient. The devastating public speech confirms this failure. A presentation about understanding customers turns into a confused breakdown before an audience expecting professional wisdom. Michael can explain empathy, but cannot practice it. Charlie Kaufman and Duke Johnson use puppets to portray adult disappointment, without emotional distance. The film's mature power comes from asking whether loneliness is something happening to Michael or something he repeatedly creates. His world may appear identical because he has stopped granting individuality to anyone who cannot save him. Number 4. Sausage Party, 2016. Every product inside a supermarket believes that being chosen by the human gods will lead to paradise beyond the automatic doors. Frank, a sausage, shares that faith until a returned item warns him that the promised world is actually a kitchen. His search for evidence turns a colorful grocery store into a story about religion, propaganda, fear, and survival. The kitchen sequence delivers the movie's most effective shock. Ordinary cooking becomes a disaster when shown from the food's perspective. Ingredients flee across counters while humans unknowingly create chaos. The rounded character designs resemble family animation, making the panic more surprising. Back in the store, Frank tries to reveal the truth, but many products reject it. Their beliefs give suffering a purpose, and abandoning those beliefs feels more frightening than danger. Some characters demand proof, while others defend tradition, because certainty keeps society organized. The final supermarket rebellion becomes loud, violent, and deliberately excessive. Yet beneath the crude comedy sits a serious argument about stories used to control frightened populations. Sony announced the project as adult animation from the beginning, so its provocation was never accidental. The movie's brightest joke is also its darkest idea. Characters created to be consumed discover that their entire culture prepares them to cooperate. Once they recognize the system, freedom becomes possible, but agreement does not. Sausage Party looks like a reckless parody, yet its true target is unquestioned certainty. Number 3. The Wolf House, 2018. A young woman named Maria escapes from an isolated German colony in Chile and hides inside a house with 2 pigs. The building initially seems protective, but walls begin moving, painted figures crawl across surfaces, and objects refuse to maintain one shape. Maria transforms the pigs into children named Ana and Pedro, creating a family that slowly reproduces the control she escaped. The film's most unforgettable sequences appear to happen without cuts. Characters are painted, erased, rebuilt, and pulled from walls while the camera watches the room mutate. Stop motion usually gives solid objects life. Here, solidity itself becomes unreliable. Every transformation feels like a memory being rewritten before it can settle. A gentle narrator describes Maria's escape as disobedience, echoing the language of propaganda. The voice promises safety, while the images suggest punishment, hunger, and psychological captivity. The wolf outside may represent a leader, a belief system, or the authority Maria still carries inside herself. What begins as refuge becomes another prison. Maria loves the children, controls them, fears them, and damages them, while insisting she is protecting them. The story draws inspiration from Colonia Dignidad without becoming a conventional historical drama. Graphic spectacle is not required because the entire atmosphere feels forbidden. The house behaves like trauma. Rooms change, identities dissolve, and comforting stories conceal coercion. Watching it feels less like viewing a completed movie than entering a damaged mind, while it desperately rearranges the evidence. Number 2. Mad God, 2021. A figure called the Assassin descends in a corroded diving bell, carrying a map and a bomb. Beneath him waits a universe of ruined machines, enslaved creatures, laboratories, giants, and civilizations built upon older remains. The deeper he travels, the less his mission resembles heroism. The landscape seems designed to consume every living thing entering it. The descent is the defining scene. Layer after layer reveals workers crushed by systems they cannot understand, monsters feeding on weaker creatures, and machines continuing long after their purpose has disappeared. Dialogue is unnecessary because every object explains the world's cruelty. Later, the assassin is captured and examined. His body becomes material for another process, showing that identity has little value inside this universe. Scientists, rulers, and godlike beings create life only to exploit, study, or destroy it. The cycle appears ancient and impossible to interrupt. Phil Tippett developed the stop-motion project across roughly 3 decades, and that history can be seen in its dust, metal, models, and handmade surfaces. Nothing appears conveniently clean. Every texture suggests years of decay. The film is disturbing, but not merely because of grotesque images. Its deeper terror is philosophical. Creation itself seems indifferent, and suffering functions like an industry that nobody remembers building. Mad God feels like evidence recovered from a universe where progress continued after compassion vanished. Number 1. Fixed, 2025. Bull is an ordinary dog who discovers that his owners plan to have him neutered the next morning. Believing his identity is about to disappear, he escapes for one final adventure with his friends and attempts to confess his feelings to Honey, the elegant show dog next door. The simple premise quickly becomes an aggressively adult comedy. The most unbelievable feature is the visual style. Director Genndy Tartakovsky drew inspiration from classic theatrical cartoons and romantic dog animation, then applied that craftsmanship to jokes intended strictly for grown viewers. Bull and his friends move with expressive poses, beautiful timing, and elastic faces, creating the appearance of a lost family classic, behaving very badly. Its production history became nearly as unusual as the story. The completed film lost its original release path and remained without a clear home before Netflix released it on August 13, 2025. A hand-drawn adult dog comedy from a major animation studio had nearly disappeared despite being finished. That survival earns it number 1. The movie combines traditional cartoon beauty, shameless comedy, and an industry story demonstrating how uncertain adult animation remains. It should not exist according to modern studio caution, yet it does. Fixed escaped the shelf and reached viewers who could finally decide whether rescuing it was brave, foolish, or both. Which animated movie shocked you most, and which title would you never watch twice? These films prove that animation can carry horror, satire, trauma, politics, and adult comedy as powerfully as live action. Some became cult classics, while others nearly disappeared. Tell us which forbidden cartoon belongs in Part 3. Then like, share, and subscribe for more forgotten films that crossed every expected boundary and somehow escaped the vault.